Afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give it one more minute before we start. Oh, there we go. Actually, we can start now. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning on our panel about the Youth Capital Shift publication. We have a few awesome women on our panel today who I will introduce in a moment. But before I get there, I just wanted to chat about house rules a little bit. I think everybody's microphone is muted. If you can keep it on mute for this conversation, we'd really appreciate that. However, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box and then to use the chat box for any technical issues that you might have. If you have any questions that you'd like to pose to the panel, please post them in the Q&A box. It's next to the participants icon at the bottom toolbox. And we'll be addressing the Q&As at the end of the session in the last 20 minutes. So thanks for that. Moving on to our panel of discussants, I'd just like to introduce them. So we have Gracious Lekauti. She's a Youth Capital influencer. She's currently at the University of Johannesburg and she's studying civil engineering technology. She's also the deputy chairperson of an organization called Tutors Without Borders and is the founder of an organization called Embrace Shehi, which is an NGO focused on liberating young South Africans from intergenerational issues. Next, we have Tessa Drums, who is a director at Jasoro Consulting. Tessa has about 15 years of experience under her belt as a development practitioner and researcher and trainer. She was also appointed as part of the National Planning Commission in 2015, and we recently heard that her term is going to be ending in August. Next, we have Lauren Graham. Lauren is the Director for Social Development in Africa at the University of Johannesburg. She describes herself as a development sociologist and is interested in finding solutions to the contemporary issues that we face in today's South Africa. And then lastly, I've joined the panel. I'm an innovation director at the DG Murray Trust. I have previously worked in a social policy space and currently work in the social development sector in grants management and incubation of nonprofit organizations. And I've got a particular interest in youth unemployment and what some of the solutions might be for that space. So thank you once again for joining us. To each of our panelists, it would be fantastic if you could just give us a quick idea of why you decided to join the panel today. Lauren, could you go first?
Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be on the panel and loved reading through the Shift publication, so thank you for the invitation. Although I work on issues to do with various different vulnerable populations, my real passion is young people. And like you, Shakira, have a strong interest in young people's employment transitions and how we can be supporting them to get a transition to work.
Thank you. Gracious, could you go next?
Hello, everyone. I joined today's panel because I believe that there's power in our voices, and through collaboration we can do greater things. It is time we start using what we have to achieve, not what we are programmed to must have in order to achieve, which starts with using our voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Gracious. Tessa, could you give us an introduction as well?
Hi, everyone. So really happy to be here. Really on this panel for two reasons. I'm a lifelong youth worker who believes in creating advocacy spaces translate into real change for people. More importantly, I think that the Youth Capital work takes forward so many pieces of research and policy discussions, advocacy that we've been seeing in the last 5-10 years, and it makes some solid proposals that are worth our engagement. So I look forward to today.
Thank you, Tessa. So speaking of Shift, which is the reason many of us are here today, I'd like to just give a brief summary of the publication and the action plan. So if my colleague could just share the screen, the slide of the action plan slide, that would be very helpful. While he does that, I just wanted to make a note that Shift is really a collaboration amongst many partners. And those include the youth capital influencers who continue to make this work relevant on the ground and drive change through their local campaigns. And it also includes the many organizations who were so willing to share their insights and learnings with us, including the Michael and Susan Dahl Foundation, REAP, Umuzi, AVA, and Say Yes. And I'm just going to apologize now if I left anyone out. And then also the 350 young people who we met traveling around the country between 2018 and 2019, who were just willing to share their insights and learnings with us. So that's how the action plan came about, and we really consider it something that Youth Capital is driving, but a plan that belongs to many people, or at least that's what we hope for. And so just reflecting on the action plan, which is really the backbone of the whole publication, we aimed to create something that would really weave together the lived experiences of young people, as well as the existing data and research that we could find, to create a solutions-based publication. And we came up with 3 broad areas that we felt the key issues fell into. The first was education. And we decided to really shape that around the idea of all who start should finish. And this was around the idea that dropout across education institutions has been an existing problem for the past decade. And to capitalize on this generation, we need to deal with that. Next was the sense of transition, so the idea that young people become very vulnerable at the same moment that they're looking for work, and that this is a particular part of their lives that needs a proactive strategy to support them from school or education institutions into the world of work. And so we developed a body of thinking around that, and a few particular levers that we think could be pulled to change the current situation where transitions are by and large unsupported. And then lastly, jobs. The focus here was really to shine a light on what we think are issues or areas of the economy that aren't really gaining a lot of attention and traction, and that we think could be maximized for the benefit of young people. And so I'd really like to kick off with a discussion on education in particular with Gracious, who just turned off, but I'm sure she will be back, around the education agenda in particular. And so with this piece of the action plan and the publication, we really framed it around 4 key points. And these points were particular blockages or areas that we feel there are solutions that currently aren't being maximized. So the first was around certification. We believe there are many young people who spend a lot of time studying who don't get certified at the end of their qualification. And this could be for a number of reasons, including historical debt, or just the fact that they administratively can't access them, or that there isn't a certification unless you complete your qualification and graduate. The following 2 were really about sort of the social factors that affect education. So there's one around Catch Us Up, which is saying that young people, the pathways back into learning are very complex, and often young people fall behind in their schooling or in their higher education, and there isn't really a strategy dedicated towards catching them up, and that there isn't a lot of social support for students and learners who often feel quite isolated in the education space, which deeply affects their learning. And then lastly, an issue around data. We feel that there is a missed opportunity to really collect meaningful data around learners and students, where we can identify when they need support, when they're at risk of dropping out, that just isn't being either collected or valued. And so, Gracious, as a student, and also as someone who is obviously very interested in the education space with your current involvement in Tutors Without Borders, could you give us a sense of whether you think these are key areas that are holding young people back from completing their qualifications?
Yes, Shakira, I absolutely believe that that they are active, because in my case, I was unable to read when I was doing grade 5, and I had to be moved to another school where I found a teacher who helped me to catch up by teaching me how to read from scratch, starting from the basic things like your vowels and your consonants. And later that year, I became amongst the top 5 best performing learners. And when I continued with my education to high school, I from grade 8 up until grade 12. And of course, it was because of the support that I constantly get from my teachers and my principals. So, yeah, it is crucial that these plans we see them as effective, as one needs to be first catched up before they are supported. And then when they do get the support needs to be consistent so that it may lead them to being certified.
Gracious, I think you make a really interesting point about what a supportive adult can do for a learner and how that's overlooked. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Okay. So I constantly got the support from my principals and my teachers, by them showing me that I can do this. I mustn't, like other people say, just because you come from a rural school, you don't have access to internet and stuff, then you will not enter to university. So they made sure that they provide me with opportunities, like transferring me to go attend to other camps outside the region, my school region, so that I can get exposed outside world is like.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting how you draw on ideas of encouragement, support, and exposure, as well as the academic support. But it seems like for you, it was a range of different kinds of support that really made the difference.
Yes.
Have you seen the same kind of thing with Tutors Without Borders? What has it been like to be on the other side of supporting learners?
Or we get learners whom they felt like they can never excel in mathematics because it's difficult, but mainly because their teachers don't give them the same attention that we do. So when they get to us, we make sure that each and every learner is supported by giving them extra classes and giving them our contact so that they can contact us on a daily basis, even if the camp is closed.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, particularly around mathematics, which I think many learners tend to fall behind in and are intimidated by. And just your insight around giving learners your phone number so that you can stay in touch with them even when the camp is closed. Do you have any thoughts around sort of the current school closure and how staying in touch with learners might be important?
Oh yes, because right now most of them, I think that they have given up. They don't know of the opportunities that are in hand for them, because now I used to use platforms such as eSchool to boost my learning. So for us to have contacts, to have their contacts, it enables us to share the information that we have, the resources that they can use, like eSchool and SIVA, to make sure that they get their matric certificates, and so that they progress and they go to university next year.
And Gracious, on that note, can you tell us a little bit more about your influencer campaign that you're currently working on, and how that might link to the Shift action points?
Okay, in our case, our campaign is more focused on giving a mentor. It's a mentorship program to the matriculants, where we believe that they are already cashed up when it comes to everything related to basic education. So ours is to support them by helping them to know their inner selves, where we will provide them with a life coach to help them get through that, where we want them to believe that they must start working with what they have in order to achieve, not what they are programmed to must have in order to achieve. For instance, now they are struggling with their classes. It's not the same way in which as we attended our matriculants classes, where we get to go to camps and other things. So for us, we want them to see that there is life beyond COVID-19. So what we do also is to teach them on the current latest technological changes like fourth industrial revolution, where we want them to see that even though they might not have coding and robotics, they can still learn more about it so that they don't fall behind when everything goes back to normal.
Gracious, can you tell us a little bit more about the mentorship angle and why you decided to focus on making that a key part of your campaign?
We believe that young people from rural areas, they tend to be neglected when it comes to their psychological being. It tend to be neglected. So we want them to know that they are not alone. We want to support them, help them find their purpose, in which we will provide them with books. One that we are going to provide them is purpose driven, where we'll engage it. We're having interactions with our life coach, and firstly, we are going to have a personality test. We are going to make them have personality tests, where we want them to know their inner selves. But then moving from the personality test, we want to help them choose careers which are best suited for their personalities, and not only best suited for their personalities, but then the careers that will be sorry about that, the careers that we will enable them to get jobs in the upcoming years. So that's why we have our mentorship program combined with an insight on what 4IR is, so that they choose the careers that are best suited for them, but meanwhile accommodating them in the upcoming years.
Thanks, Gracious. And I think you make so many interesting parallels between the idea that wraparound support is important, that programs are important, and that academic support isn't just about the academics. You can be a caring adult who makes a huge difference in a learner's life or a student's life. And in fact, one of the really interesting things that we found out and built a case study around in Shift was the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation's bursary program, where students actually highlighted that the psychosocial support was the most important factor of the entire program, contributing to their success. So thank you, and thank you for your work. And just to say to everyone, Gracious and the other influencers have had to pivot their campaigns into a remote and digital space very quickly. Have had to figure out how to participate with us on the program in a very different fashion, and they have been incredible. There are about 54 of them across 3 different provinces right now. So thanks, Gracious. Is there anything you'd like to say in one last minute?
What I would like to say is that we must encourage the youth at times like this, because most of them they seem like they have given up. So for ours, we are going to be looking out for donations, where we want them to buy data for the learners that are going to join our virtual mentorship program. We would like to extend it not for it to be 1 week, but to be a constant thing that we do. And through the resources that we would get from people, they would enable us to dwell more on factors like fourth industrial revolution, because we can see that the world after COVID-19, it is definitely moving towards fourth industrial revolution. So that is what we would like to focus more on.
Great, thank you, Gracious. And if anyone wants to learn more about our influencers and their campaigns, get in touch with the Youth Capital team and we can make that connection directly. Next on the agenda is the shift proportion of the publication. As I mentioned, the idea of transitions and focusing around that was really the idea that young people have a really rocky road between education and the world of work. And that road often takes a lot of parallel steps that can be hard to navigate, that cost quite a bit of money and can take a lot of time. And those three things together end up leading to increased economic discouragement, where young people find that they stop engaging with the economy, but they tend to only stop after years of trying, after years of looking for work. And so we wanted to create a section of the publication that was really dedicated to understanding what are the obstacles that stand in the way of young people between education and work, and how do we really start to deal with them. And the sort of areas that we came up specifically with were making job seeking affordable. Jobs are expensive things to find. And some of the work that Lauren has worked on has shown that looking for work can cost around 600 Rand per month. And Lauren, you're welcome to correct me if that number is wrong. And this is often linked to the costs of data and transport. The next thing that we understand is that social networks are very important to finding work, and that young people in particular have very limited social networks. Many young people do not have an employed adult within the household, and if you don't have that kind of connection, it can be very difficult to get a referral or a connection to a job or an opportunity. The next was around bridging the information gap. And this is really twofold. The idea that information is very difficult to come by for young people around opportunities, and that it can be very hard to navigate your way towards work, but also that employers tend to only value high-level qualifications, and many young people don't have those, right? Because the places in higher education institutions are very limited. And so we've got to figure out what are the alternative ways that we can measure things like aptitude or competency or potential instead of just using qualifications. And with those in mind, I'd like to draw on Lauren. I think Lauren has spent quite a bit of time trying to make sense of this transition phase and trying to understand what are the particular ways that young people can be supported. Lauren, in your experience, do you think that these are key issues in supporting transition?
Absolutely, and I think it's you know, what appears in the report really echoes a lot of the qualitative work that myself and others, some of whom are on this call or on this webinar, like Ariane, have done, and we definitely see those themes coming up: the costs of work seeking, the lack of social support networks that they can rely on, and the information. I think what also comes through clearly in the report, and what I'd really like to reiterate, is that the consequence of that is that the burden of navigating your way to a job or to a training opportunity and figuring out how these things fit together to help you towards what you're aiming to get to really is the burden that sits on a young person themselves, because there isn't a lot of support out there. Even when we talk to young people and they talk about how important their families and that are, often their families don't have access to that information. As you said, often these young people are growing up in households where nobody is employed. And so the costs of this, not just in terms of financial costs of work seeking, but the emotional costs of constantly trying something, maybe getting into an opportunity, but it leading nowhere, or trying to get a job and you get turned away. Those emotional costs and the social costs in the household are very, very high. And we expect young people in their households really to carry those costs, both the financial and the social and emotional costs, without sufficient support. Our systematic overview research showed that one of the really neglected areas is in this intermediation. So if we're thinking about transitions, connecting young people from school to either training or employment, we would call that intermediation. And there's very little going on there that is well recognized and well understood. Can I jump into the solutions quickly? Because I really do want to acknowledge that I think one of the areas that is untapped potential that is beginning to be recognized more and more is the role of CBOs and NGOs in local communities. And I know that there are some that were profiled in the report, like AVA, that we've had contact with. There's others that are on this call now, like CIE, Harambee, Naspers Labs, and a whole lot of others that I can see representatives from on this webinar. And I just think that, you know, when we talk about growing circles of support, that can be individual mentors, and Gracious's experience with an individual teacher who took interest in her really shines the light on the importance of those individuals who really recognize the potential of young people. But I do also think that CBOs and NGOs working in local communities are crucial resources. And I think we need to capacitate more and more in local areas to provide that kind of support, to provide accurate and curated information to young people, to guide young people on how do you put together a CV that accurately flags what your skills are, not just what your qualifications are. That invites them to capture, oh, you've done some volunteering experience. That's not something you should overlook in your CV. That should go into your CV. So that kind of guidance and support towards helping them to make decisions and access opportunities on their transition to where they want to go. And I really think that we need to be working closely with CBOs, acknowledging the work that they are doing, capacitating CBOs to be providing more and more of that kind of support to young people. Also, particularly because they're locally based and young people can access them. And that drives down the costs of transport and data that are necessary.
Thanks, Lauren. That's a lot of food for thought. And you've mentioned a few different ideas in your words, and one of them was capacitating organizations, CBOs and NPOs that already exist in the sector. Do you have a sense of what kind of capacity needs to be built? Was there any out of your previous research?
So I think that partly that is about understanding what kinds of program elements work in facilitating young people's transitions. A lot of employability programs focus a lot on the technical skills, which is important, particularly if you're training young people for a particular sector. But in the same way that you mentioned the importance of the psychosocial support, we're finding much the same thing across youth employability programs, that really what makes the difference is that soft skills, psychosocial support training. And so interventions in that way. But I think there's another level of that, and that is feeding some of the research that's being done on how to flag to employers what your skills are, what are the things that you need to include in your CV. Those sort of that kind of information, to be getting that out to CBOs that are connecting with young people so that they can feed that to young people as well and guide young people. We could also be thinking about a much more structured program where you have trained child and youth care workers in CBOs whose role it is to be providing that kind of information, talking to young people about what are the available opportunities in your area, what are the services available that you can get to, let's have a look at your CV, or it could be a lot more informal in simply getting that information out to CBOs that are connecting with young people, so that that information is curated for young people. Because a challenge when we talk about bridging the information gap is there is so much information out there, but the question is then, how do we curate that? How do we know what's good information and what's not?
Yeah, I think that's such a helpful comment. Just even myself trying to work out the different levels of the NQF and how you get back into second chance matrics. I literally have a diagram that I use to test that. So thank you. I think that, you know, it's very interesting the way that psychosocial support and guidance keeps cropping up. And the idea of flagging competencies to employers and other ways that make sense to showcase the skills of young people, I think is a very, very helpful topic. And just a shout out, I don't know if they're here, but to Muzi, who I know works very, very hard on trying to make that happen. Lauren, is there any last words that you'd like to say before we start talking about jobs?
No, I think we're going to talk about partnerships a little bit later, but I do think partnerships at a local level are absolutely crucial, that NGOs and CBOs are working together with local government services, so that young people are not having to knock on multiple doors, but that there's dedicated support that helps them to access opportunities available in local communities.
Thank you. Yes, and we'll definitely pick up on that note, and I think it's such a helpful thought to leave us with, the idea of young people knock on too many doors, and that there is information out there, but it's very, very difficult to navigate, and so we've got to work on that as a sector. So thanks, Lauren. And then onto the idea of jobs. You know, when we were trying to come up with this kind of publication together with many partners, we kept being really struck by the idea that the economy is now contracting and hasn't really grown. And so when we were thinking about how to make jobs and employment a central piece of this puzzle, it was a really difficult question for us. And ultimately, we decided that we needed to maximize what we had. And so our job was to shine a light on opportunities that were currently being overlooked in the existing economy. And we thought that was really feasible. So there were three important areas that we described in the publication. The first is that all experience has to matter. I think there is an idea that if young people aren't formally employed, they aren't doing anything. And it's just not true. Young people tend to do many things. They've often doing something in the informal economy. They've often got a side hustle. They may have volunteered. And so we've really got to make sure that employers value that and that young people feel it's important enough to talk about. So all experiences matter. And then next, unlocking public opportunities. And this was really about making sure that incentives and public support for employment is streamlined and easy to access. And in particular, we were thinking about things like the ETI and making sure that those would be sort of designed alongside other incentives for small and medium enterprises, making sure that access to CETA funding and support is streamlined, because we heard from many different partners that it's quite difficult to access. And then making sure that young people can access the opportunities that exist in the sector. For instance, yes, that could give them work experience. And then lastly, an important piece of our thinking was making all public employment work matter and make sure that it's not a dead end. Currently, there are about 240,000 people in CWP. In terms of the report, we noted that there was a massive population in 2016 who was part of public employment, and we really feel like that could be maximized much better to create an opportunity where young people develop skills and also contribute to social impact in their local communities. And so in this kind of between private sector, public sector thinking about existing opportunities. Tessa, we'd really like to draw on your experience, particularly because you've worked in spaces like the National Planning Commission. Do you think this approach is a helpful one? And in your experience, what do you think some of the levers could be?
Hi, thanks. So what's most exciting for me about the perspective that you've taken on the question of jobs is the idea of focusing what we have. In the National Planning Commission, we're fortunate enough in the last few years to take up research that we've done called the Youth Labour Market Decisions Report, and really workshop to a point we now have a paper that gives a few very practical but also overarching issues and suggestions around how we turn this around in the long term. And part of that is suggesting 3 models of youth transition to the labour market. And one of those being formal sector, where we want to focus on demand side reforms, and the social economy, where we want to focus on how to get young people in not only into public employment programs as pointed out, but into a number of informal and social sector work that's often undervalued in our system. And what has really a preoccupation of mine in thinking of this is that before we get to talk about those things which are reflective of Europe, the demand side challenge and the social economy, where the third leg or the third model is about entrepreneurship, but I'll put that for today. But our overall thinking was also about changing the language. And while you use the word jobs, we're actually seeing a slight move away from thinking about jobs in talking about labor market opportunities and the concept of work rather than jobs. And the reason why I think this is an important transition we make in our minds, in our framing of issues, is think that we think about a job as a very particular thing linked to formal economy and linked to big business. Not even small business fits very well into our conception of what a job is. Because a job has a particular place you're employed, has a particular time frame, has high levels of kind of security and certainty, and as a long term. And that's the thing we're struggling with. And I think we're not only struggling because of kind of economic reasons or job scarcity reasons. We're also struggling with the world of work is changing, and the conception of what work is and how work happens in the world is also changing. Precariousness and precarious work used to be something that was not even thought of as real work. And you have something like gig economy that is making precarious work actually the norm. And so there's a need for us to rethink what we think work is and what we think jobs are. And I think that the demand side changes that we can reflect on, and one of which is question about experience sounds into this idea of rethinking work and jobs. One of the things that always struck me, as you said, about young people, is how they undervalue themselves and what it is that they do. And from very young ages, young people in our country are actually doing things and learning skills, using those skills, and often never monetizing them. Often never thinking about ways to monetize, because they don't think of those things as work. They don't think of things as jobs. And so they don't put it onto their CVs because they don't value it, and they don't put it on their CVs because employers don't value it. And so there needs to be an entire cultural shift around how we think about what counts as work and what doesn't count as work. And acknowledge that, especially as we talk about 4IR in the future, I always put out to people that IOL, in its list of 4IR top 10 4IR skills, all of those skills are non-technical skills. They're about analytic thinking, they're about creativity, they're about problem solving. Those are all things that don't necessarily need to get a certification for to have skills. that you can learn through the course of doing work, doing life, all sorts of things, that they're going to stand in great stead in any work environment. And so the need to change the way we think about work is about how young people value who they are and what they do, but also, and not helping corporate or government or any kind of employer, but imploring them to rethink how they look at young people, how they look work, how you look at what matters, and even how to quantify within their own business practice. And the second part of that is the social sector and the social economy. And I think there's so much value in this country, both in terms of our history and in terms of contemporary people in the social sector. We have a long history of volunteerism, of community activism. COVID-19 has shown that to me in just a stark way again. At the beginning of lockdown, instead of being able to engage with counselors about finding out who the indigent people are, communities, and who needs support and who needs help, it was young people calling me saying, hey, I've got a list of 50 people in the community. I've got a list of 200 households need to be fed. I know about 3 or 4 grandmothers who can't get to the doctor and are afraid how to intervene. And all of these people consider themselves unemployed. Probably about 2 or 3 that I was engaging with are self-employed. Most of these young people, community activists who consider themselves unemployed. That's because we don't value social work in this country. We don't value community work in this country. We don't think that it's to be remunerated unless it looks like a full NGO. So unless it's NGO and it's big, and for us, the sector, we actually need to take a lot of responsibility for this, because somehow it's worthy and valuable for us to have NGO jobs that are well paid, but then people in communities must be treated like volunteers, and their work and their contributions are not valued much. We also need to do some introspection in the NGO space, ask how are we valuing young people and their contribution into the social sector, and also in the informal sector, because roughly, again, young people are busy. The informal sector in the country is the most overlooked sector. We have millions of people employed in the formal sector. And again, COVID showed us up where we went into lockdown. We were worried about what happens with the grass at the end of the month. And we were thinking about millions of informal traders who were hit badly from day one. And so we need to, again, have a shift in focus, shift in perspective. When we say all experience matters, it's not just all experience matters, it's all experience is valuable and contributing to both our economy and people's sense of agency. And we need to start nurturing that sector, the informal sector, the social sector, much more than we do now.
Thank you, Tessa. Those are some really, really important points. And there are just so many ideas that you've challenged with your thinking. Currently, we often think about how do we meet demand, how do we change our assessments and meet demand. And it sounds like what you're saying is we really need to shift how we think about demand, how we think about jobs versus work, how we think about what is valuable, and the many social activities that contribute not just to our social systems, which is critical, but also our social systems and our economy as a virtue of that. And I think your last point around it's not just all experience matters, it's all experience is valuable and contributes to our economy has really just landed so well with me and thinking through some of this section. So thank you for that. We are a little bit tight on time, and so I'd like to use this as a segue to jump into the partnerships discussion a little bit. Tessa, and if we can start with you, how the action plan is sort of trying to create a central plan for multiple people across different sectors to have one strategy for youth unemployment that we follow. Do you think it's possible for multiple actors to have one shared plan
Not only do I think it's possible, I think it's absolutely essential. There are two major areas, and again, there's something that we've been reflecting on in the National Planning Commission work. But there's two major factors we're not doing a good job of accounting for. One is how much work is happening in the youth employment space. So we're spending millions and billions every year investing money into the space, and not necessarily count that effort, and not able to track what's going on in different places and different spaces. But more importantly, we don't have an overall picture of success. So we don't know how many jobs need to be created based on how much effort that we're putting in and how much money that we're putting in. In our count, and this was 2016, 2017, we could find very easily about 4,000 youth employment related programs across the country that were specific about employment and employability. Now, how is it that we have that much capacity, but many people don't know each other's existence, many people don't know what they're doing, many people don't have a shared vision? And what I'm hopeful for is that that the initiative within the presidency can be a space where we meet each other. Everybody working in the space can start to meet each other, see each other, match each other, but that there's also a level of leadership provided that gives us a common vision. And the second thing that we have to do much better on is monitoring and evaluation. We cannot continue to spend on things that don't work. We cannot continue to do things that only have limited outcomes. And I think I'll be very open about the fact one of the greatest concerns right now is how much we're spending on youth placement programs. And we're not thinking necessarily about what the cost benefit is of something like youth placement programs. And the young people are getting the kind of value that they need in order for them to build the agency and build the networks to build careers and pathways beyond those points. We need to start asking questions about what we need to stop, what do we need to start, and what do we need to continue. We need a centralized M&E system, and I think only government can satisfactorily provide the framework, safe space for all of us to meet, to assess ourselves, to have some criteria against which we can work, so that even if we're not all connected physically, that we're all connected in purpose, and we're all connected in ability.
And that's a strong point, the idea that we shouldn't just be connected in purpose, we need to be connected in accountability, which is so helpful. And that, you know, part of government's role could be creating the space and the framework for greater collaboration, greater accountability, and monitoring and evaluation, because like you say, there is money being spent, but we're never quite sure of what the value of that investment is. So Lauren, Tessa has touched a bit on the role of government, you know, in the sense of all of us galvanizing around one key action plan. In terms of the other stakeholders like civil society, academia, and the private sector, what do you think their roles would be if we had a shared adopted plan?
I firstly just want to echo the importance of bringing people together and the role that government plays in that as a coordinating body. And just to say that in some of the policy discussions we've had over the last year as part of the work on the basic package of support for South African youth, there definitely seems to be the moment. There definitely seems to be much more commitment to collaboration, to bridging divides, to working together at the government level, much more so than we've seen previously. And so this report comes out timeously. And if there are action plans that come out of this in terms of driving some strategies forward, now's the time to be taking advantage of those. And I think the presidency is playing a crucial role in that. The other partners in this, I do think that something that Tessa did touch on, and which we've touched on in several points in the conversation, is the role of CBOs and NGOs and the social sector, and the need for better coordination there for youth development organizations. We used to have a really strong youth development sector that identified as a sector rather than as individual NGOs. And maybe the time has come to be bringing those back together and to identify as a sector, or a youth employability sector even, where those thousands of organizations that are busy in this field are brought together and can work collaboratively. And I think funding streams and that are often become divisive rather than collaborative. But there's then the role of academia and the private sector. So I think more and more there is recognition of the role of research in evidence-informed policymaking, and the need for research to be informing what we're doing. And we're seeing that a lot in the COVID space, both not just from the health side, but also if we think about the NIDS-CRAM study that Saldra and Stellenbosch and various other partners have been involved in, how that has started to inform responses to COVID. And I know that Saldra and UNICEF were involved in a GenU survey on how COVID is impacting on young people. How do we make that, and Youth Capital's really committed to, how do we make that kind of evidence available and accessible to inform programmatic and policy making? And similarly, how do research organizations make that data available and accessible that are usable for policymakers and those involved in programming? And then the private sector. I think in our review of youth unemployment that we did in 2018, one of the findings was that the private sector came quite late to the party on youth unemployment, but does increasingly play a role. And has been brought in more and more around these conversations. And there are organizations that have been working with the private sector to shift their thinking around youth employment and to bring them on board as partners. And I think there's a lot we can learn. And it's the side of the demand side, and the role of the private sector is something that's not particularly well understood. And we definitely need to be driving a lot more private sector involvement.
Thank you, Lauren. I think it's definitely true, the idea that the private sector has come quite late and is now trying to get involved. And I just hear Tessa's comments around youth placement and the need to think through pathways beyond just the placement experience sort of bouncing around in my mind. But I think your observations around the role of research and the connection between research and policy making, and how do we bring those government and academia closer together, is a really, really important one that we need to drive forward. And I love your comment that this is the moment. I think in this kind of work, we can get sort of steeped into a very dark space quite quickly, just because of the scale of the challenge. But the idea that there is a window that is opening up is quite hopeful. So thank you for that. And then Gracious, onto you. Youth Capital is trying very hard to make sure that the research is met by the lived experiences of young people. That young voices are really at the fore of driving this agenda. How do you think we can more effectively bring in young people's experiences and voices into decision making?
I think that solutions should be curated around a point of engagement, engaging with the youth, hearing their stories as raw as they are and as messy as they are, allowing them to tell us how they did it, how those who overcame their struggles, how did they overcome them, and where did they fail. Then this will channel us to become better solutionists. How did they fail, and what can we do to make sure that we give them a better opportunity to become the best things that they have envisioned to be.
Thanks, Gracious. I think that's such an important point, that young people's stories and all of our stories are messy, and the failure in those stories is often the most important part of them. Because I think often with young people who, like Lauren had mentioned earlier, are knocking on many doors, often more than once, that failure can become very discouraging. But it is important to hear about, and important for the shaping of decisions at a policy and a programmatic level. So on that note, we have a few minutes for questions. I understand that Lauren needs to go, so I'd just like to say thank you for spending your afternoon with us. And if there are any questions directed at you, I can send them on to you after the panel. But yeah, would you like to say goodbye quickly?
Yes, thanks. Sorry, I was muted, the phrase of the year. Thanks so much for inviting me to be part of the panel. And I really encourage you to take these forward and to connect with what's already happening out there, that we really do seize this moment to drive this really, really important agenda. So thank you for participating or inviting me to participate, and I'd be very happy to participate in any of the actions going forward. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And thanks again for joining us on the panel. And now I'd like to open it up for questions for 15 to 20 minutes. If there are any questions from the attendees, you're welcome to pop them in the question and answer box. But just to kick us off, I know that there was a question around how do we get the agenda itself into the hands of policymakers, or at least some of the action points from something like Shift and from the sector more broadly. Tessa, I know you've had some experience of government. Do you have any insights that you could share with us? I see Tessa is on pause, or is frozen. So I will just give her a moment. And then perhaps, Gracious, ask you for your opinion. You've been part of the Youth Capital Influencer Program for the better part of this year. Are there any ways that you feel Youth Capital has tried to work towards including young people in decision-making spaces or conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that they have done a great job in connecting all youth from each and every province, where we get to hear different stories, how they overcame them, and to actually see that it gives us that sense of an aha moment, where you get to hear other influencers telling us how they overcame them and finding common ground, seeing that we actually have the same story to tell. It's just that we are in different parts, but we have the same thing that we can tell.
Thanks, Gracious. And then Tessa, I don't know if you heard the question that I had directed at you, or if your screen had frozen. No, okay. I know that with the publication there was a question submitted around how do we get the agenda in Shift into the hands of policymakers and decision makers. You've had quite a bit of experience in working with government, so I was wondering if you had any thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think there are a few things that we can do. Number one is create a targeted approach. I think building relationship with policymakers and with government departments and giving them a very targeted version of what it is that they contribute and how it is that this can plug in to what they're already doing or what they should be doing, I think is really important. I think that at this point, an adversarial relationship with government is not as useful as one that seeks to, in very precise ways, show how work contributes to what's already happening in government or can pivot what's already happening in government. I think the second to do is to make use of the political moment that we have now, where we have presidency strongly involved on the question about youth employment and this nexus between presidency, the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability, and the NYDA. All three of those departments, all three of those spaces currently a work in progress around youth, and I think it's really important to use political moment now to make sure that the voice of people who are working in the space, the voice of young people themselves, are heard, and heard with specificity. I think specificity is absolutely key to getting policymakers to hear what's happening and to see how to follow through. One of the things we must never take for granted is the idea that you can just give the state the ideas and then they'll go ahead and implement. I think any implementation of anything we want to see can include the state, can even decentralize the state, but must involve other actors in terms of implementation. If you're just going to take a policy and land it at government's door and ask them to implement, that's how you end up being disappointed. Implementation must be the job of more than government, and actively so from the point that we take the ideas there.
And then perhaps on that note, Tessa, I know it wasn't you who raised the question, but you might have some interesting thoughts around the idea of revitalizing the concept of the formal youth development sector. It was an idea that Lauren had mentioned. How do you think that something like that could be elevated or initiated?
So there are a few things I'm more passionate about. The youth development sector as a whole, and it starts first with the NGO sector itself. The NGO sector and people who are working in the youth space need to first bring young people back in as partners and leaders of the space. I think that we've become comfortable with the idea that the youth sector works for young people, as opposed to young people work for themselves within the youth development space. But that's also separate from saying that we also need to professionalize youth development. We need to start saying what a youth worker is and how someone becomes a youth worker. So not everybody who's young and doing active work is a youth worker. We need some level of particularity about what kind of skills, what kind of resourcing, what kind of certification, what kind of support somebody needs in order to become a youth worker. I know that the CETAs, for instance, have some programs that they've developed, or some training material that they've developed around creating youth work, but there's not enough organizations taking that up and actually creating certification opportunities for young people. And then the third thing I'll mention is about getting young people in and having them be part of a connected space. You know, when you're talking about growing circles, for me, growing circles is about saying that young people create the core of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And so if we can get youth practitioners, and becoming a youth practitioner as something that's real and serious, we can really create ways that young people grow their own circles of support. We have examples in the life models of yesterday where we've seen how peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer support can be a powerful mechanism for change. And I think we need to go back there. We need to go back to the point where we can upskill young people and put tools into their hands. As a parting shot, I should also say, we have a serious conversation about what the picture of success for youth development is. We all know that development is a transitionary phase, being a child to being an adult, but I don't think we know collectively as a sector what we think adult means, what we think, when is a young person developed, when has a youth been developed. I think without having that sense of we know what we're working towards. If you go to other countries and you look at their youth development plan, their youth development policy, they have a sense of by the age of 21, or 25, we want young people to be able to do the following things and have following skills. And that's how we'll know we've done our work in the youth development sector. I think we don't have a unified voice yet around what success looks like, and it will take us a long way.
Thank you for that. I think these are all very conversations that are being had right now around this question of professionalizing the youth sector or youth development workers. What is that? this question of what are we aiming for when we're thinking about youth development. And I know that we've tried to draw some parallels with the early childhood development sector of understanding what the key critical levers are and the outcomes we're trying to reach are, and having the same kind of clarity for the youth development space. Gracious, I see there is a question on 21st century skills. And for you as a young person who currently is running a mentoring program and is a student in civil engineering technology, what are 21st century skills for you? What does that mean?
Firstly, I believe that it starts with us acquiring all the human skills that we can possibly can, because I think one thing that is going to separate us or that is going to make us stand out in the upcoming years with fourth industrial revolution and other revolution is our human skills. What do we have to offer that the robots won't be able to offer? So yeah, that's what 21st century skills mean to me. Acquiring human skills through the platforms and organizations such as Youth Capital and other volunteerism.
And are there any particular skills you think influencers have built through the influencer program and through other volunteering opportunities?
Yes, such platforms gives us an opportunity to trust that we are disruptors and that our voices matter. Skills such as being able to lead without being given opportunities that one would think that I'm too young for this. I can't lead people. I can't do certain things. Skills, such skills of being able to connect with people.
Oh, sorry, your signal broke up a little bit there, but I believe you were talking about leadership and this perception that young people are too young to lead, when actually, in fact, given the opportunity, they can show their muscle. Okay. And I think that's really relevant, located in the current conversations around, young people in government positions, young people on boards, and the push to make sure that more and more young leadership is demonstrated, particularly across the public sector. So I think that unless there are any last questions, because that is it for our Q&A, I would really just like to thank our two last panelists, Gracia and Tessa, Gracious and Tessa, who took the time to spend the afternoon with us and who have both taken a look at the publication and given us some helpful feedback through this discussion. As I described in the beginning of our afternoon together, the action plan is really, we view it as a collaborative document and as something that is shared by multiple partners. We really relied quite heavily on other people in the youth development space to help us understand and showcase different solutions. And so thank you to them as well for being a part of this process. In terms of next steps, our publication is available on the Youth Capital website, which is youthcapital.co.za. And anybody who hasn't yet read it is welcome to take a look and download it. If anyone would like to understand more about the influencers, their campaigns and the influencer program, they're also welcome to contact us. Our details are on the website. And we also have a fantastic communications manager named Clotilda, who I believe some of you know. So she is also available via email if anybody would like to contact her. And if there are any last questions that people would like to send to us to answer, you're welcome to do that. And we're also, this session is being recorded, so if anybody would like to view it after the live session, We will be posting it on various channels, and you're welcome to reach out to us directly and we'll share it with you. So Tessa and Gracious, are there any last words that you would like to share with the audience? Tessa, perhaps you can go first.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to share some of the thoughts. And I think just as a sister, I think the more we stay in conversation with each other as people who are committed to people's success, and as people who are holding space for young people, better we'll do. And as Lauren said, now is the moment. There is a particular moment right now where we can highlight things in a way that we haven't before. I saw somebody make a comment about COVID and how it's shining a light on things like stipend and M&E. And again, that shows us that right now we can demonstrate some of the pitfalls that we've been talking about for years. And people are more likely to hear us and listen, understand impact, because we're in a moment of crisis. And so let's not waste this crisis and use it to make sure that young people are heard, young people are seen, young people's issues and their transition into work is attended.
Thank you, Tessa. Gracious, are there any last words you'd like to say?
I would like to thank everyone for joining us and for the insightful thoughts that we had from Tessa and Lorraine and you, Shakira. So yeah, collaboration is really key, and moving forward, I see a better future for us as the youth of South Africa.
Thank you, Gracious. And I think those are really helpful words to leave us with, all of us who are in this webinar today. Just that collaboration is key. It is going to be the biggest asset that we have going forward. So on that note, thank you very, very much for joining the panel today. Please reach out if you have any further questions, or if you would like to see the recording or the 3 slides that we put up earlier. We're more than happy to share that. And if you haven't already, please download our publication. We also have a monthly newsletter where perhaps we could pick up any last comments that weren't addressed that people would like some answers to. So thank you very much, and have a good afternoon, and thank you, Tessa and Gracious. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.